Hello, everyone. Happy Lunar New Year as we welcome in the fire horse and say goodbye to the wood snake. Shout out to all you Chinoys and Chinais out there. This is Cheryl Sampson Ramirez, co founder of the Filipinx and Wellness podcast. Co hosting this episode are Sheena Katz and Mark King. We're delighted to bring to you all Stohner, Executive Director of Centre Kapwa and co-lead for Therapin Canada, hailing in from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. The title of this episode is What is Kapwa in French? All this and more. I hope that you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everybody. Magandang araw. We welcome you to the ninth episode of our fifth season for Philippine X and Wellness podcast. I'm your co-host Sheena Katz, and for this episode's audio description, currently I am wearing a sleeveless brown top. My hair is down. I'm seated in front of a bluish gold painting behind me, and I'm currently streaming from Los Angeles, California.
What's up, everybody? My name is Mark King. I'm your co host for today's podcast. And for this episode, I am wearing a Mabuhay Vibes hat that is a cork on the top, and a black rim. I also am wearing a light brown shirt that has the word Carañosa on it. Don't ask me what it means. I also am in the back have a reddish tapestry with a black outline. Oh, and I'm also streaming from Los Angeles. Following our last episode in Hilot Binabaylan with Reverend Rolando Comon, also known as Apu Adman, master trainer in Hilot Binabaylan and program director for the Hilot Academy of Binabaylan, we bring to you our first guest out of Montreal, Quebec, Canada, Stohner, executive director of Centra. Did I say that right?
Centre. Centre Kapwa.
Centre Kapwa, and Canada's co-lead for Therapin. Now, as mentioned in previous episodes, all views discussed are for informational and educational purposes only. It's not meant to be medical advice, nor does it constitute therapy or professional advice. Please always consult with your healthcare practitioner, especially before starting any exercise or new health program, or a qualified mental health professional for your particular condition. So, without further ado, we'd like to welcome everyone to our podcast. Stohner, welcome to the podcast. Bonjour.
Bonjour, bonsoir. It's the evening here for me. Yes, nice to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Stohner. I'm a mental health counselor and community organizer. I go by the pronouns she and her. And I am calling from what was originally Jojage, the land of the Kanyengehaga Nation, the people of the Flint, the keepers of the Eastern Door. And I humbly extend much respect and gratitude for everything that I benefit from on these lands and waters to this beautiful community, colonially known as Montreal, Quebec, Canada. In terms of descriptors, I am wearing a purple t shirt and some large frame clear glasses, as well as some kulintang beaded earrings.
Well, welcome. We're so happy to have you today. And we actually typically like to open our episodes by getting to know a little bit about our guest's origin story. Now, I know that you're streaming from Canada, but can you also let us know where are both sides of your family from?
Yes, absolutely. My family is currently in Manila, but that was during the exodus of industrial times, the times of industrialization. But on my maternal side, we are from Imos, Cavite, and on my paternal side, from Iloilo.
Thank you. This is so exciting to have you on as our first guest on the podcast from Montreal, Quebec. And, it's really incredible to capture more stories within our community. So, the full title of this episode is What's Kapwa in French? A discussion on Filipinx-Canadian diasporic mental health and wellness. Tell us and provide us more with some context for those that didn't grow up in Montreal.
Absolutely. So essentially, Montreal is in the eastern part of Canada. And our population just in the city itself is about 1,000,007. But in the greater metropolitan area, if you include everyone, it's at about 4 million. Some fun facts is that Montreal is an island. So it does get really, really cold here. And another fun fact is that 85% of the world's maple syrup comes from here. The maple syrup mafia is a whole thing for a whole other podcast that we can talk about. In terms of the Filipino community, a lot of us have been kind of here since the 60s was kind of the first wave. And I would say we're about at like fourth, fifth, sixth generation. And it's just kind of interesting because Montreal is um, the only city in, it's in the province of Quebec, which is a francophone province. So essentially, French colonizers ended up coming here and leaving that legacy. And the language here is predominantly French. So for our Filipino community, for a long time, it was understood as just a place of transition. You kind of stay here for a couple of years and then go elsewhere. But no, some of us have now established and have children who have children who have children who grew up speaking French. So it's yeah, it's really interesting to see the community taking up more space now and not seeing it such as a transitory place.
That is really cool because when you provided us with the recommended title for the episode, it threw on another layer for us to unpack, not only a new culture but also another language to explore within. So, can you share with us, what is Kapwa in French? Well, maybe we start by defining for our community what is Kapwa first and then what is Kapwa in French.
Yes, absolutely. So Kapwa is our inner sense of interconnectedness that we feel towards each other as human beings. So it's actually a value that's not necessarily specifically Filipino. You can find it in some ancient African proverbs. I'm sure some folks know the term Ubuntu, which is essentially if one falls, we all fall. Very similar to our notion of isang bagsak, right? So it's linked to a lot of Filipino pre-colonial culture. Even if it's a Tagalog word, there are similar words in different Filipino languages. And essentially, I wanted to call this episode "What's Kapwa" in French because growing up here at first we didn't really see that many Filipinos, so I actually didn't even know what it meant to be a Filipino Montrealer, a Filipino Quebecois. What did Filipino Montreal community mean and look like? So there was a lot of kind of just trying to figure out what that meant and trying to find your community. No culture is a monolith. The Philippines is very diverse, so over 7,000 islands, close to 200 languages are spoken. So, what's Kapwa in French is something I'm actually still discovering. What does it mean for me to be from here, to have grown up here, to have a migration story and history that ended up here, and now also raising a family here?
Wow, that's awesome. In your and thank you for defining kapwa because I think we use that word a lot, and sometimes people really don't understand the true meaning of it. So thank you for providing context in that. As you have been trying to find what kapwa means for you in Montreal, uh, in that discovery for yourself, what has the reception been like? Has that been open for you, or describe that experience for us?
Absolutely. Well, not gonna lie, grew up around a lot of religious environments. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. As I said, we're not a monolithic culture, but I do think there are a lot of folks in our communities that don't necessarily connect to it the same way as previous generations have. So I've seen folks, stay in their family's church and be a little bit miserable because they weren't connected. And I've also seen folks leave their family's churches to go to other churches and other denominations that work best for them. Growing up for me, I just really never connected to that part of our culture and kind of always wondered how that happened, what we had before. But I think like a lot of us, the history that we're taught is really that there was nothing in the Philippines before the Spanish arrived. Anyways, that was my experience. So just imagine kind of reading just like one chapter of a book that has so many chapters, right? So as I got older and decided to do my undergrad in feminist studies, I was just being exposed to so many like Latinx, indigenous, Black feminist writers who were talking about decolonization and pre colonial culture and just kind of embarked on this whole journey of, what was in the Philippines before the Spanish arrived? And that was a whole beautiful journey of self discovery. But not gonna lie, also very lonely. It was just me alone and my books. And eventually, as I kind of started exploring more Filipino feminisms and what that meant, and what did studying our pre-colonial culture mean and look like, that's when I actually started finding community who were kind of thinking about the same things and asking the same questions. And this was also the time where I was finding a more solid sense of self. So I think this very much links to Filipinos in wellness, Filipinos in mental health. Um, I think a lot of folks quote Jose Rizal with "You don't know where you're going unless you know where you come from," and that's a whole journey to be able to go on. And wearing my mental health counselor hat, I do have a master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy, and it's proven and researched and studied that folks who are more connected to their cultural communities actually have better mental health, have more self confidence, are more resilient in the face of adversity. So it's been a whole journey, and it's been really beautiful to find myself, find community, and connect to lovely folks like you as well and have these conversations.
That's great. It actually leads into the next question. And I also would just want to acknowledge too, it sounds as if in the Montreal area, you are forging this well, not new insight, but this ideology or this connection to with other Filipinos in the area to create this Kapwa sensibility, which is awesome. So thank you for that. That is great. So expanding on the second part of this title, let's start our discussion on Filipinx Canadian diasporic mental health and wellness. Let us in on some of the themes that you've encountered while growing up and living in Montreal.
So yeah, for sure. Thanks for that question. I think none of these types of journeys are linear. You're kind of going back and forth and up and down and sideways. Yeah, so essentially, as I was mentioning before, when I started studying feminism, exposed to all these Latinx, Black, Indigenous writers, and then eventually Filipino writers who were talking about feminism, talking about decolonization, how it was affecting us. Um, I was noticing that a lot of these writings were written quite a while, some time ago. And what's interesting here is that we've been in Canada for quite some time, but you don't see us anywhere. So, one of the first Filipino anthologies that came out of the community that is called Filipinos in Canada, Disturbing Invisibility. And this came out only in 2012. That's not that long ago. So, you know, because of a lack of professionals in Canada, like my aunties told me stories about how they graduated their studies in the Philippines and they literally walked out of their universities and there were Canadian agents being like, come to Canada, we need professionals. So we've been building this country. In that realm since the late 50s, early 60s. But you really don't see us anywhere. There's a show that just came out literally last week called The Unstoppable Jenny Garcia, which is streaming on CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I am 42 years old. This is kind of one of the first times I'm seeing Filipina Canadian nurses portrayed on TV. So it's beautiful, but also extremely problematic. So, what does it do to someone's mental health and wellness when they don't see themselves reflected anywhere or when they only see themselves reflected in a particular way? And the particular way that we have been reflected is as caregivers, as people who are taking care of households in more affluent neighborhoods. And don't get me wrong, I think this is very honorable, important work. Um, but what's problematic is the kind of policies that were put in place that attracted so many Filipinas. So this is also a very gendered issue. Um, so at this point, this program is abolished, but it kind of just looks different and people are still kind of coming in waves. So we used to have a program called the Live-In Caregiver Program, which attracted 97% Filipinas. So that means that in Canada, all these folks who, I don't know, run Fortune 500 companies and, are CEOs of big corporations would actually not be able to do that unless there was a Filipina helping rear their children, helping manage their household, helping take care of their elderly. But again, it's work that kind of there hasn't been that much expression of gratitude. But what's beautiful is now we're seeing the children and the children and the children of these caregivers growing up here, having gone through an education here and speaking up and taking up space. So that's been really, really beautiful. But again, to just go back to your question, what does it do to your mental health and well being to not see yourself reflected at all or to see yourself only reflected in one particular way?
Well, it's interesting. What comes up for me is the whole seen but not heard, and I wonder because of the colonization, the patriarchy in our own culture, if we somehow maybe even perpetuate us not being seen and just being quiet. So it's interesting, and also, yeah, to your point, very sad that you've only heard of something that was just published or documented in 2012. That's a very interesting point to bring up. Now, France, like, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I have found a few pieces of academic research that dated a little bit before. But then again, these were done by academics that weren't from our community and that were predominantly white. So that's a whole other issue as well. Um, what do our stories look like when they're actually not being recorded and researched and told by folks who look like us and who come from similar backgrounds. So yeah, I just wanted to also add that perspective of and then are the real stories being told when it's kind of someone coming in and has that relationship of trust been built. So it's been really beautiful in the past few years to see more emerging Filipino Canadian scholars, tons of Pinoys doing their PhDs. I'm like all about it because some of this research that came out from these white academics was actually that Filipino Canadians were not trying to achieve higher education. And there was even a point where, I don't think it's the case now, but there was even a point where there were some statistics that were showing that Filipino-Canadian youth had one of the highest high school dropout rating, which is really shocking when you look at Filipino culture. This whole culture in the Philippines of when people graduate, how it's such a big celebration. You can go to a store and get a discount because you were a graduate that year and things like that. Like education is such a huge Filipino value. So to think that something very disturbing happens systemically, that our youth were not aiming for these goals.
Yeah, to your point, it's using Jose Rizal's quote. You have to know where you've been in order to know where to go, and you being able to shed light on a lot of these. Uh, a lot of this is great information for everybody to know. So, you currently are the director for, and I'm going to pronounce it. See, correct me if I get this wrong again. Centre Kapwa. Did I say that? Yes, I love it. Could you please share with our community what is Centre Kapwa, and why was it formed for you?
Yes, of course. So we are a nonprofit that was founded quite recently in 2022, and we focus on the mental health and well being of Filipino Canadian youth and their families through art, movement, and conversation. So it's actually a pretty funny story how we ended up here. I live in a neighborhood that's called Côte de Neige, which means snowy hill, and it's actually quite a hub for the Filipino community here. So down the street from me is all the Filipino restaurants, all the Filipino stores. It's kind of just like where we've always established. There's a park a couple blocks away with like a little mini monument honoring Jose Rizal. So this is like kind of unofficially our Filipino town. Um, but that being said, as much as there was kind of like that community representation, we weren't seeing that representation in terms of politics. If you kind of look at the geography of Côte de Neige, we're this poor neighborhood that's surrounded by a whole bunch of rich neighborhoods. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we were living here because we had to get to work, and we were the ones kind of making these really affluent neighborhoods function essentially. So what I'm trying to get at is that the funny story is that in 2021 we had a municipal election here, and a whole bunch of community members encouraged me to run in an independent party, and just to kind of try to get a foot in the door, because there were all these people who were making decisions for our community who once again didn't look like us. So Centre Kapwa is the result of me gloriously losing an election. But also proudly losing an election, because what ended up happening is I had community behind me because I've been a community organizer for a long time. When it comes to migrant justice, worker justice, youth led movements, I've always been really involved. But running for office gave me kind of this larger platform to attract kind of more Filipino Montrealers who had similar values as I did. So once we kind of licked our wounds and took care of our hearts and spirits, I just like looked around me and saw so many wonderful Filipinos with so much drive, and I was like, we need to do something. We need to do something with this energy. So that was happening on one hand, and then on the other hand, as mentioned, I'm a mental health counselor, and I just noticed that in my practice, it was mostly Filipinos reaching out. Um, and a lot of them, I think individual therapy is good, important. It's a way I make my living. I definitely encourage it for everyone. But I also think that we need more than that. Like, as Filipinos, we are a collectivist culture. So we very much have collectivist values. So a lot of our healing, yes, can absolutely happen on an individual level, but it can't solely happen on that level. We also kind of need community to feel seen, to feel heard, to see our issues reflected back to us. You were saying this, Marking, about, like not feeling seen, right? And I just noticed folks needed community where it was okay to talk about our mental health. Um, Unfortunately, we grow up around this culture of silence when it comes to anything that has to do with mental health. We're kind of told to either just grin and bear it, or to just like, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just work hard and keep our heads down and everything's going to be okay. But I think we've been around long enough now to see that keeping our head down and working hard, sometimes we're still not okay. Right?
Right.
And I think you alluded to this earlier, Marking, of like, this is the model minority myth. It's how we keep perpetuating the unwellness in our culture, right? So what does it look like if we actually, be truth tellers and speak to the fact that our baseline is actually we're not doing very well? And how can we be doing very well when we're still healing from forced migration, from family separation, from systemic barriers that cause us not to have as much access? So I'm thinking of like Filipinos who are well educated in the Philippines and then come to Canada and also into the US and are deprofessionalized, right? What does it do to you when you're cleaning someone's house, but you're actually like a master's in nursing back home, So, what would it actually look like if, as a culture and as a community, we be honest with ourselves and say, hey, we're actually not well. We're not well. And how can we care for ourselves and each other a little bit better? So essentially, Centre Kapwa was created to fill in that gap and to provide programming where it would feel safer to have these conversations. And that's why there's that piece that we always say of, we do this through art, movement, and conversations. Um, our recurring programming, there's two things that we do regularly. One, which is a Kapwa walk. And it's essentially literally just we get together and we go for a walk together. We grab a cup of coffee. Uh, there's always a flower shop stop on that itinerary, and something to do to connect with nature. But what's interesting is the Kapwa walks were created and started in the middle of winter, in the frigid cold, because winter is also really isolating here, So I would say after the holidays, January, February, March, we all get um, what's called SAD, so seasonal affect disorder, or sometimes we just call it the blues, but like it's a thing and it's diagnosable. And what happens is we tend to isolate, right? So the first Kapwa walk was literally launched in the middle of winter in the frigid cold. And you would be so surprised, but so many folks showed up because they were like, I just needed something to like get me out of my house, and like I just couldn't get myself to I couldn't get myself out of my house, but this encouraged me to do so. And what we did is we started also doing them. The theme was to discover different neighborhoods because, as I said, I live in the neighborhood where most Filipinos kind of land and stay, and it feels safer, right? Like you walk down my street and you definitely hear karaoke, smell barbecue, and hear different Filipino languages being spoken. So as a newcomer, that feels safer, right? But then you're also not taking up space in a city that I would hope folks want to call their own. So that's one of our recurring programming, and the other one is something we call Ka-Artehan, with a emphasis on the art piece. So you don't need to be an artist. It's run by a wonderful crew of artists in our community. But we were told that like either artists felt really isolating because when you're writing, painting, or whatever, you're usually doing it alone, or folks who were just like, I don't consider myself an artist, but I knit, and then these things are isolating. So it's a place where folks gather and just do their different art or dabble or explore different art together. So it's really cool because you walk into the space and you'll literally like have someone beading, someone else doing arnis, someone else playing the violin, and it's just like a space to be together and doing art related activities that you would usually do in isolation. And I'm sure you're both not going to be surprised how much mental health conversations just comes up organically because folks feel safe to do so.
Yeah. It's the there was a lot there. So let me unpack a little bit of that. First, get to acknowledge too that you running for office, oh my God, that is so huge. And what came up for me as you were talking about that, and you were saying that you lost, but really it was a win, total win. Like this was not happening to you, this was happening for you. I'm sure you're familiar with that phrase. And by you running, it allowed you to put a spotlight on a gap that is missing so that other Filipinos can be like, "Oh, wait, there's someone here that can actually maybe help me out with my mental or emotional well-being." And it's culminated into this nonprofit that you organize, which is phenomenal. Your mission for Centre Kapwa is to unlearn, unite, and uplift. You talked a little bit about the programming, but can you go a little bit deeper on that mission statement? What that means for you and what that looks like for the organization?
Yes, absolutely. So, unlearn for us is to really see kind of the all these things that we've been taught is Filipino culture, and haven't had the space to kind of critique and problematize and have the conversation about, well, what's working and what's beautiful and healthy and what should we keep, and what are the things that are things about our culture that are actually not as healthy and that can actually even be quite toxic, and really create a space where we can talk about how we let what do we learn from it and then move on, essentially. What's really interesting is when new folks come into our space, the comment we hear the most is, "This is my first non-toxic Filipino hang." Which I think says a lot, right? Like, you'll definitely have youth come in and be like, "Wow, there's no one who told me I gained weight or lost weight or I'm eating too much or eating too little." There's no one who told me, like we have youth who are studying, who are doing their bachelor's in art, and they'll be like, "There's no one who's here who's telling me, anong gagawin mo dyan? Like, what are you gonna do with that degree?" Right? So already just a space to come in and show up and be Filipino in whatever way that means to you, um, is kind of what we're trying to work on. And then unite is exactly that. Unite is the part where our can we celebrate that we're all different and that's okay. It's actually our strength and it's actually our beauty. I always say, like, ask 12 titas to make like pancit and you're going to have 12 different kinds of pancit, like depending where they're from, right? And that's okay and that's beautiful. And then the uplift part is, we have this saying in Filipino culture, I think I'm sure you're familiar, where we talk about crabs in a bucket, right? How we're always like, oh, like it frustrates me so much that we've normalized saying Filipino culture is like crabs in a bucket, where if one crab tries to crawl out, the other kind of tries to pull them down. And I really want us to stop uh defining our culture in that way, because the way I see it is, crabs don't belong in a bucket. Crabs belong in paradise on a beautiful beach, in the jungle. And the way I see it is, the bucket is colonialism. The bucket is the hold that colonialism has had on us. And we've created these really unhealthy behaviors towards each other. And how do we get all of ourselves collectively out of this bucket and back into the beautiful beach and paradise where I see ourselves, yeah, supporting each other in this process of unlearning.
It's such a hard thing. Crab mentality has just been forever. Like I used to do theater many moons ago, like over a couple of decades ago, and one of the things we talked about was crab mentality. And now 20 plus years later, we're still talking about it, probably even more so. But I do really think like what you're doing, and then also other people are doing work around mental health and emotional wellness, mental and emotional wellness, that helps to fill that gap to really um, address the crab mentality.
Yes, absolutely. And to do more of that work, we also hold space for different healing circles, where folks can exactly share about their feelings, like that sounds so simple, but it's so hard when you haven't been taught that language. So we've definitely gathered just community in general together, or women, or we've also done kind of like these mom circles. And I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that, like, a lot of our mom wounds come out because we come from a culture where lots of moms left, and then that relationship is really fragmented and needs to be healed. But it's a tough one. It's a tough one because we're also supposed to be really grateful for all the sacrifice. So I think it's an important space where we have to kind of hold the complexity of both. We can be very grateful and honor all the family sacrifices that were put in place in order for us to kind of try elsewhere and perhaps do better than the motherland, while holding the grief, the anger, the loss, like all the difficult feelings about having to have left the motherland, left the family, lost the language, so I'd have to say, Centre Kapwa definitely attracts a lot of folks who didn't feel Filipino enough. That's kind of different things you'll see on our website or our merch, because that was just like a recurring theme. So our board has a lot of mixed race Filipinos who didn't feel Filipino enough in other spaces. And that's really important for me too, as someone who's raising a mixed race child. I always kind of gently call folks in when they say that someone is half. I'm like, you can't be half of something, like half what? No, I like to say they're double. They're both. My son is 100% Filipino, as much as he's like 100% Salvadorian. His father's from El Salvador. And, we can't fraction people off. We have to celebrate kind of the wholeness of all of their identities. San Capua has also attracted Filipinos who never learned the language because they grew up around parents who were like, nope, you don't need that. Just learn French and English. But then who grew up later on to be shamed because they didn't speak a Filipino language, So like that weird complexity of like, no, assimilate, but also somehow maintain the culture. So yeah, it's like all these kind of weird opposite things that we're holding space for. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that we also have attracted a lot of queer youth who didn't feel comfortable in other spaces as well, and that was actually one of the many reasons that we also started Sant Capua. I was there. There are Filipino orgs here in Montreal who've been around for a long time, but they were founded by, more conservative, more religious elders. And if that works for them, that's totally okay. But the youth, if they didn't play basketball or want to do pageantry, there was just like no space for them to be their wonderful queer, non-binary, or trans selves, right? So we're kind of, yeah, this crew of misfits who hang out and do weird circles together and cry together, but it's been really beautiful and really healing.
And speaking of holding space for both, what lies ahead for Satakapa? Where do you see your trajectory within the realm of the Filipinx-Canadian mental health and wellness?
So I think this is where I'll jump into some Therapinay stuff, if that's okay, which I think is going to be a really good segue. So for folks who are not familiar with Therapinay, it's essentially an online platform that gathers all the information of a whole bunch of Filipino wellness practitioners. So if you're looking for something more mainstream, like a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a social worker, you can definitely find them there. But if you're looking for someone who does hilot, someone who's a massage therapist, someone who's an arbolario, so like our herbal medicines, and is doing healing work from a more cultural perspective, and who are culture bearers, they're all there. And it's a network that was started during COVID, as a resource for folks. So I'm really really grateful that the lovely Elda Almario of Therapy, so she's a psychotherapist based out of Ontario, which is the province next to us, and has a beautiful private practice where she does play therapy. Um, Reached out to me because she was appointed lead for Canada, and she was like, I can't do this alone. I can't do this alone. And wanted me to co-lead with her. And I humbly accepted. I had been familiar with the platform. And what I love about it is that we're really breaking down that taboo and that stereotype that none of us are in this profession and that we don't need this, right? That platform is really showing that, again, there's a diversity to Filipino culture, and we all need different ways and modalities of healing, and they exist and they're out there, So I'm just thinking of like the youth who is like, oh, so just a little sidebar. Another community that we've attracted at Centre Kapwa that I really wasn't expecting and that we're learning, is there's a small community of Filipinos who were adopted by French Canadian families here. So I think Asian adoption is more popular in Korea and China, but here in Quebec there were a few Filipino children that were adopted. And yeah, so we've attracted a few folks from that community, and that was definitely not on my radar, and completely unexpected. But it was, and for the people who have joined, when I've asked them, they were like, no, like it was just like the only, like by looking on our online presence and the values that we put out, it was, for all of them, it was their first time reaching out to community that felt safe, you know? So, that being said, going back to Therapy Night, I'm just thinking of exactly this Filipino adoptee who maybe only speaks French and is like, does a Filipina therapists who speak French exist, so that's really what this platform is for, so we can find what we need, because there's such a complexity to diaspora experience, depending on what year we've arrived, what wave of migration, what generation we are. We all have similar but also different wounds, and so that means similar but also different needs. So I really love this platform. So to go back to your question of what's next for Sant Kapwa is beautiful collaborations, like with Therapy Night, like with you all, with Pilipinx in wellness. And what I'm hoping for, so please pray to all the ancestors, is to get funding to be able to offer more support to our community using the Therapy Night network. So, not gonna lie, this is the challenge. So, the challenge is convincing the people who have money that culturally relevant services are needed and important. Um, and I'm going to bring you back right now to just like the reality in Quebec, back to politics a little bit. So on the provincial level, the party that is our administration in power is called Coalition Avenir Québec, and essentially the leader, his name is François Legault, and he has gone on record to say that systemic racism does not exist in Quebec. So it's a really interesting place to be working from when you're trying to advocate for culturally relevant services for your community, right? So I'd love to hear your reactions before I keep going, because on the municipal level, so at the city level in Montreal, our mayor and our government is like, yes, absolutely, systemic racism exists. And they've actually even put different things in place and created like a DEI policy and all these things. And then at the federal level, like at the Canadian level, uh, that's acknowledged as well. And I'm actually a part of a coalition working against anti Asian racism that was mandated by the federal government. But then at the provincial level, we have a leader who's like, that doesn't exist. I really want to hear your thoughts on that.
It's interesting because, as you know, we're all based in the US, largely in Los Angeles. So we have similar issues. um, this side, almost on the opposite side. I feel very grateful to be in California, in Los Angeles, because there's a certain mindset here that's vastly different than the rest of the US. So I think I need some time to unpack that first, because we're seeing the same thing on my side. I feel like it's a little bit opposite, where it's a little bit, you know, better, I guess, in California ish. And still it's not. And still you see what's going on with the rest of the world. So both exist here too. I don't know, Mark King, what do you think? You're in the same spot that I am.
Yeah, I for sure, exactly what you're saying, Sheena. It's very interesting when someone denies that there's systemic racism. For me, it's okay. Where's that person's come from? And it sounds as if there's a little bit of gaslighting in that comment. So, which is a whole nother thing, because it's just narcissistic patterns and behaviors that is so prevalent in our politics, and it sucks that it's also happening in Canada, but obviously we see it here in the United States, but just everywhere around the world, like these narcissistic patterns and behaviors are so prevalent, and they're gaining momentum, and people are wanting to support these false narratives and they're being gaslit. And we talk about narcissism all the time, or at least it's a lot more prevalent in the conversations, but still people get caught up in the web of the gaslighting, the lying, the making you feel like you're crazy is completely insane to me. And it's frustrating to hear that people just have the blanket over their eyes. I forget what that saying how that saying goes, but they're blinded by, man, just their ideologies or whatever it is that is informing those statements they can be reckless. They can be very reckless, and there's a cost. There's the mental and emotional cost that it inflicts on people who are not knowing that they're being gaslit.
100%. Like I agree with all these reflections, and the reality is there's a common misconception that giving to one particular group will remove from another, when actually that's completely false. When we take care of the needs of historically marginalized groups, it actually creates more access for everyone. you know um One example I can think of is, when you in cities, you walk down the street and you get to an intersection, and sometimes there's like a little curve, and that was created for people in wheelchairs, but then moms in their strollers were like, "Yes, thank you." So we don't realize that actually creating more access for one group creates more access for all. And what's mind-boggling about the government that we have in place right now, is they've, for me, culturally relevant, um, mental health and wellness support is really important, but also we need to just go back to basic needs, right? Like, is everyone's basic needs taken care? Like, when I do one-on-one therapy with folks, they often think that, like, we're gonna, for session one, we're gonna do this deep dive into trauma, and I'm like, no. My first question is always like, how are you eating, how are you sleeping, and how is your home life? Because if, again, the baseline is not being taken care of, how are we are supposed to move forward, and thrive? And the current government that we have now says that systemic racism doesn't exist, but has recently cut funding and stopped building schools where, in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. So it's so interesting that it's like, no, budget cuts. But then when you really look at a map and look at where the budget's been cut, it's usually in our own neighborhoods, and then we wonder why our kids are having a hard time finishing high school. We're wondering why it's harder for us to get into higher education. Um, but what I also love is that there's really been, more solidarity being built across communities. So that's, another way to answer your question from earlier, Sheena, of like, what do we see next? So, um, as much as, we're not necessarily going to get along with all Filipinos because we're different, and some might still be in this, scarcity mentality, crab mentality space, we do have friends and allies. So, Centre Kapwa is dear friends with another org called the Black Healing Center, who do really similar things, exploring what pre-colonial, Afrocentric healing looks like. We have other friends from an organization called Le Centre Binetna, and this is from the Maghreb community, and they're finding ways to, just as, and I learned things too, right? So just like there's Filipino psychology, I didn't know there was like a psychology of Islam and like all these ways and modalities of healing, and I learned that through, Centre Binetna. And then we've also been building relationship with, indigenous communities here. Shout out to Elder Wanda Gabriel, who's been a wonderful, mentor and ally and friend. We go to her community's powwow every year, and it actually became a recurring programming with Centre Kapwa. Every year, we take the community to, the Ganyegehagas, people's powwow. So that's also our way of like building links. So you end up finding the folks who get what you're doing, right? And who are doing similar in their cultures and wanting to, support each other. So I'm actually really excited. We're going to be on a panel, all these lovely orgs that I've been, telling you about, and talking about exactly why is culturally relevant, support so important, and why do our governments and major institutions need to fund these things.
Yeah, and speaking of finding the folks who do get it, tell us more about your clients and the community that you serve. What are some of the current demographics? And do you have any memorable stories that you could maybe share with us, that's kind of spawned from your programming and conversations?
Yes, of course, absolutely. So, in one-on-one conversations, there's, really beautiful things that come out about just, I see folks really wanting to build connections. And I think that's really normal for folks who've been forcibly, displaced. And, one situation in particular that, I'm remembering is I connected with someone, who was doing kind of these, projects where they were bringing art to incarcerated women. And I just thought that was so wonderful and so lovely, and was trying to find ways to, support them in this work. And what's interesting is through this journey, at the beginning of the show, you asked me where, my family was from. But this is actually information I didn't have until, I don't know, 5, 7 years ago, which is not that long, because there is also this very Tagalog-centric, Manila-centric, classist culture in Filipino culture of, like, folks, um, who are, like, there's a spirit, there's like a sentiment of anti-indigeneity, right? Like, I remember growing up where the word igorot was derogatory. Like, I think the communities have reclaimed it, but growing up, I knew that as a derogatory term. So my family is definitely victims of that, where for the longest time it was like, no, I'm from Manila, I'm from Manila. Everyone's from Manila. Of course, everyone's from Manila. In industrial times, we all ended up in Manila because there was no more money to farm or survive in the provinces. So it was through kind of just digging and exploring and asking. I want to make a note telling folks that your elders are libraries, and sometimes it's hard to get information out of them, but I just encourage folks to just keep at it and keep asking questions and finding other ways to ask questions, to get this information and to get this such important ancestral knowledge. So back to your question, Sheena, all that to say is I felt so called to this person who was doing these prison art programs, and then eventually found out that, and started helping, and then eventually found out that the prison that I was helping was in my great 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 grandmother's hometown. So talk about an ancestral call and an ancestral pull, and you know um our elders in this life and beyond bringing us together so that we could support and heal together. So that was a really crazy but fun but interesting moment, and I definitely cherish it.
That's incredible. Wow.
Right.
So, friends, we talked a little bit earlier about Therapinxy and you as a co lead for the Canada chapter. Tell us, who is your other co lead, and let us in on what you both envision for Therapinxy Canada.
Yes, so it's the lovely Elda Almario from Laro Therapy. So she's based in Ontario, which is just the province over. And her and I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago. So there's this org that's called Kabangka Canada, and it's run by a whole bunch of wonderful Filipino youth. So it's an org that is by and for you Filipino-Canadian youth leadership and mentorship. One thing they do every year is they do a conference in Ottawa, where our nation's capital is, where our parliament is. And the conference is called Pinoys on Parliament, lovingly called POP or POP. And it's been going on, I think we're at like year 6 or 7 now. And it was born out of a Filipino student group, essentially, that were like, hey, our communities don't know much about politics, and they should, because we're reaching almost a million Filipinos in Canada. But also B, showing that there were a lot of Filipino Canadian professionals doing a wide range of things, and not kind of just the stereotypical things that are very important, and honorable work. But it was a place to show the youth that, yeah, there are Filipino entrepreneurs, there are Filipino artists, there are Filipinos who are doing wonderful in professional sports. So this initiative, again, is a by and for, run by a wonderful group of Filipino youth. And Elda and I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago at POP. So this conference lasts about 2-3 days. The youth get a tour of Parliament. So just imagine what it does to you when you're a Filipino Canadian youth who was raised by, let's say, a single mom who was deprofessionalized, ended up having to be a caregiver, work 3, 4, 5 minimum wage jobs to raise you. Um, but then you kind of get a tour of parliament with a whole bunch of other Filipino youth, So it's again that thing of like, it's harder to be what you can't see. So as much as it just seems like, oh, fun weekend in Ottawa, and like, yes, they party and stay up late, and I've shared Airbnbs with them and had to be like, I'm sleeping, I'm sleeping, it's loud. um, and love that for them, but like the power of seeing places where decisions are made and having access to these spaces, what it does for your self confidence and what it does for our youth to just be able to project themselves. And so yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Elda there, and again, even there was so many youth who would come up to us and be like, I've never met a Filipino therapist before, and I didn't even know there were Filipino therapists. And really, Filipinos go to therapy? What the hell does that even mean? So it was really beautiful connecting with Elda there, and I can't wait for you to interview her and see how we're actually kind of complementary, because she's someone who grew up in the Philippines and practiced in a mental health profession in the Philippines, and then had to come here and do her equivalence to start her own practice, compared to someone who grew up here and kind of went through a different system here. So we envision, this is all from the wonderful mind of Elda. She's created this framework called Kamustahans. And Kamustahans are essentially gatherings where we check in on each other. Again, we need to break that. Like, I think when we talk to Filipinos and just talk about mental health and wellness, they're like, I don't want to talk about that because if I talk to a therapist, it just means I'm crazy. Like, they go straight to pathology very quickly, as opposed to just seeing that, like, no, um, just like you have physical, dental hygiene, we also need to have mental, emotional, spiritual hygiene and care for ourselves and normalize that care for ourselves. So the kamustahans are a way to kind of, yeah, exactly, just check in. And it's a framework that she's created that she openly shares. So anyone can host the kamustahan. You don't need to be a mental health professional, and have this practice of checking in on each other. I think the model minority myth has forced us to always put up a brave face. Like, I'm really tired of hearing Filipinos described as resilient. I don't know about you all, but like, I hate it. And I um hope and pray and meditate and want to manifest like a world where we don't have to be resilient anymore. I want a soft life for us. I want smoothness, and for us to just be able to go through things without having to access that skill. Um and that being said, I think what I'm getting at here is, we don't, because we present as so strong, this doesn't happen. So it's that thing of like, are you checking on your strong friends? Are you checking in on the people that look like they have it together? Because you look at Filipinos and we look like we have it together, you know, in a lot of areas, right? So can we still have this practice of check on your strong friends? Because even if I'm carrying it well, it doesn't mean it's not heavy, right? So we really want to normalize these kamustahans, and maybe tap into our network of Filipino student groups, because those are a really big thing here now, and it's been coming up in more and more in the past few years. So that's been really beautiful to see youth organize. And then again, finding ways to just use the Therapin network to provide services to our community, and somehow, yeah, find institutional funding for it, because most folks who have insurance at work, it usually only covers a certain amount of sessions or a certain type of session that we might not connect with. Not all Filipinos want to go see a psychologist. Why can't it be covered if I want to go get Hilot or batok and get some like tattoos were a healing practice for us in pre-colonial times. Why can't that be covered by insurance if it's bringing us healing?
That would
Why
be
not?
awesome. That would be awesome. I
And
would.
we're laughing about it now, but there's a queer org here who does it because they've noticed that a lot of queer youth feel a stronger, especially trans and non-binary youth, feel a stronger sense of identity when they can kind of make these decisions about their bodies, including markings. So there is a few queer orgs where it doesn't happen all the time, but they'll get a particular pocket of funding or a particular envelope and be like, who's a queer tattoo artist, and like let's set them up in our nonprofit and get these youth inked, and how healing it's been for them, and we even that we think is odd, but then we don't think it's odd if women who have had breast cancer and have had mastectomies cover up their mastectomy with tattoos. So it's like, who's allowed, like, again, begs the question systemically, who's allowed to get what type of access to healing, and who is it legitimate for and who is it not legitimate for, right? So I think that's the power of therapy now, of being like, we are allowed to access the healing modalities that we want for the particular wounds we want. And we've been contributing members of this society for a long time. So we need to care for ourselves. Like, who cares for the carers? So many Filipinos are in professions of care, but who's caring for them? So I really hope and would like to see Therapy Night Canada kind of manifest in that way. How do we step in and take care of this beautiful community that takes care of so many folks?
Yeah, not just to take create awareness around taking care of them, but how we're taking care of them as well. And I think what I'm hearing is, and I touched on this earlier, a lot of the work that you're doing is shedding light on where to go and what to ask for. And if we don't know where to go and what to ask for, then we sit and perpetuate a cycle. So it's really awesome to hear what it is that you're doing out there. You and Elda with Therapin. So is Elda, is she in Montreal as well?
No, so Elda's in Ontario, which is like a province over, and she has a practice called Laro Therapy and does play therapy.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that's really beautiful, and honestly, props to her. And I'm so excited for you all to interview her, because you're gonna see like this juxtaposition of like someone like me who's in the community sector, but then someone like her who's an entrepreneur but still trying to provide that service. So Laro Therapy has actually recently expanded and is now a bigger practice. And she has, I think, 4 or 5 other Filipina therapists working with her now. So, like, I love seeing Filipino entrepreneurship, especially for good and still in service of the community. But I'm also a big fan of us getting paid. We need to get paid. We have kids to feed and rent to pay, and kids to feed and rent to pay aside, we have wonderful skills. The Filipino community is just a wealth of talent that we kind of just take for granted, and again deserves to be compensated for the richness that it is.
Yeah, definitely deserves to be compensated. And I also love the fact, because I have a theater background and I often use my acting and directing perspective when I do coaching as well. I position it as I help you out with the character development for your life. So I love hearing that you guys
I
use
love that.
art, right? Um, and I also, so Elda is from Ontario, so it tells me that you guys, there's a lot of Filipinos across Canada, and that you potentially serves not just in Montreal but just in nationwide for you guys. Is there, what is the common theme that you guys are seeing or experiencing with the Filipino members across the nation for you guys?
So I'd have to say, again, it's a tough one because it really depends on your wave of migration and what generation you're from. So I support a lot of youth. So for a lot of youth, it's kind of that disconnection to their parents that they were separated from for so long. So how do you kind of reconnect with someone who's been so long, who's been away for so long, and then all of a sudden you kind of show up to a new country? You know, you were raised by Lola back home. Nanay left at like you were 4 or 5 years old, and then all of a sudden you're 13, 14, in the midst of teenage angst and need to kind of pack up and move to a new country, a new city, and for us here, a new language. Like most Filipinos can do quite well, of course, in terms of language, because English is a main language in the Philippines. But then that's another added barrier here. Um, or you have the youth, particularly in Montreal, in Quebec, you have the youth who grew up here. And we have this term that we say about a lot of immigrant kids here. We call them les enfants traducteurs. So it's the children who have had to be translators. So that was me. Like I came here, and there was a law in place where immigrant kids actually were not allowed to go to English school. We had to go to French school. Um, and it's good in some ways because I was able to learn and speak French fluently, as if it was my first language. But there's also kind of like this forcefulness to it. So I was always the kid who had to translate from my mom to my teacher, and because there was such a language barrier. So children who are translators are quite common in a lot of immigrant cultures here. I would also have to say that, like there's the reality of what it does to folks' mental health when they've been deprofessionalized. So then that's another kind of wave of migration and generation. Those who came here with such, rich education and have had to kind of settle for less. So the grief of the what could have been, and the managing the feelings of loss for, again, yeah, what could have been, and then how do we move forward in a positive and healthy way with a healthy vision of ourselves. So that's definitely some things we see across the board. um on the male side, it's definitely a lot harder to get folks to kind of come and get help. And, Marking, when we first met, that was something I had told you. I think, Sheena, you hadn't arrived yet, but I was like so happy to meet Marking and see and hear about the work he does, because we need the men. And I say this as a boy mom, right? I say this as a boy mom who needs healthy, positive, examples of Filipino masculinity around them. So in the men, there's a lot of issues when it comes to substance abuse and gambling. These are things, some common themes. And also just like the suppressed anger, right? The suppressed anger, and the feelings of inferiority, because often we come from, well, post-colonially, our culture is quite patriarchal. I think that's hard to deny. So what does it do to the men when the women have been the primary breadwinners, when you've been sold this narrative that your worth as a man is being a provider, right? So what has that done to our men's mental health, right?
Are you listening to that, men? Are you listening? Something to be aware of, something to think about, because it's so true, right? Like we and you talk about just the gambling and what was the other thing? The gambling and the
Substance abuse, the
substance abuse.
alcoholism, and
I
yeah.
mean, that is super toxic masculine behavior, avoidance, whatever you want to call it, depending on what the disposition is. But it is a lot of it's more acceptable to try to fix the problem through alcohol or through whatever, as opposed to actually being vulnerable. Men, there's strength, there's actual strength in that you'd be really surprised. And I love that you're creating again, you're shedding light. You're a you're a light France. You're a light in Canada for people to really gravitate towards. One of the questions, we talk a lot about mental and emotional well-being in the Filipino in the Filipinx community. What is your vision of what that can look like? What are your aspirations? What do you see? Where do you see it going?
So my hope is for us to first step into the discomfort, to step into the grief, to step into the loss, and accepting that our baseline is that we're not well. I don't think we can get anywhere until we are real about that with each other. We are people who had to forcibly migrate. And I say this and I repeat this all the time, like we hear in our communities, yeah, I'm an immigrant, I'm a proud immigrant. And yes, like I think that's a beautiful identity to hold on to. But I think the reality is this is something that happened to us as a culture. And when we don't name that, we're not putting responsibility where responsibility is due. There were so many things happening in our countries and happening in our country and then happening in countries around the world that made our elders have to leave, and sometimes not by choice. So yes, starting with the baseline that colonialism has long-term colonialism and forced migration has long-term mental, emotional, spiritual um, wounds that have been inflicted on us. And then I think that like just getting there and holding space for again that grief, that loss, and spending the time we need to spend there is going to be a huge place to kind of springboard off after for folks to be able to find the healing modalities that work for them. When I was talking about Centre Kapwa's programming earlier, some folks who don't understand this work will like look at our website and be like, okay, Kapwa walk, it's just a walk, and Ka-Artehan is just a hang. But what's actually happened in these spaces is that folks have found each other in their interests and have been doing that together. So there's a little crew, like we unfortunately don't have access to an Arnis teacher here. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone locally. So we have a little crew of folks who've like just like learned stuff online, and there's a wonderful uh martial arts teacher based in Ontario. His name is Master JB, and he's a dear friend, and we love him. And we've brought him to Montreal a few times. But there's some folks who've like done stuff online together or watched YouTube videos together and have gathered together to do this practice together. And then there are others who are like into pottery, into beading, and they've just like kind of all found each other and created their little pockets so that they could do that and heal together. So, yeah, my hope would be for us to normalize taking care of ourselves as much as we've normalized taking care of others.
It's great you talk about, like, as a community, how 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 we can take care of ourselves through all these different modalities. And again, it's great that you're able to shed that light on that information for people. Now, as a facilitator and as a practitioner, we often put everybody else before ourselves. So for yourself, how do you take, what are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself and your mental and emotional well-being? What are some of the practices that you implement for yourself?
So I think a common theme I've been bringing up is again, like, let's start with the basics and like, what's the baseline? So sleep is a non negotiable for me, especially as a mom. Sometimes I will go to bed very early with my son, and it doesn't matter if certain things are not done. Then I definitely try to make sure I eat well, I get some movement in, but I would have to say that there's no way to put any of that in place unless you find your voice and you express your boundaries. Like, I think that's the practice. We all have our thing. I always tell the youth that I work with, like, you have to find your formula. That's what I tell them. So find your formula means, some folks going to the gym twice a week and eating well is good for them. Other folks need to go to yoga 5 times a week and then need to see friends and then need to do pottery and then, need to have alone time. So um, it's not a one size fits all, but I always tell folks to find their formula when it comes to their emotional, mental, spiritual health hygiene. It's a practice that we have to do. And, it might sound silly to others, if someone's practice is to like wake up and go on YouTube and do a 5 minute guided meditation every morning. Uh, and someone might look at that from the outside and be like, really? Like, you do that every morning? Like, every single morning? Do you really need that every single morning? But then I always tell folks, you know, I bring the example of like, well, we brush our teeth every day and that's like 2 minutes a day. But if I start telling you that, like, I stopped brushing my teeth for 1 day, for 2 days, for 5 days, for 7 days, like, already folks are like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. But we should have that same reaction to folks not practicing their emotional, mental, spiritual health hygiene. So finding your formula and really using your voice to express the boundaries that are needed. I love being in community. Sometimes it's been a long week and I'm like, I'm not coming to hang, sorry, not sorry. Like, I'm not necessarily gonna show up as my best self. So on a more personal level, um I'm a big spa girly. If folks want to do a dinner date or go out drinking, I'm usually like, you say you're having a spa day, I'm there. Uh, hot yoga is a practice of mine for the past 20-25 years. And I have to say, hot yoga in the middle of winter definitely helps the blues, to just get like that heat boost, heat up your body. And I do think we need heat as people who come from islands and have been displaced from them. So living in a place where winter can be pretty brutal, hot yoga has definitely been a lifesaver. And yeah, therapy of my own and culture bearers and healers of my own. I have trusted people that I talk to, that I cry with. And again, that normalizing that release. We do need to release, and there's nothing shameful in us releasing. You were talking about the eclipse earlier. I don't know if we were on air or off air, but I've been crying so much in the past few weeks about nothing. And like, who cares? Because I also think that we're releasing not just only for ourselves, but for our ancestors who held it in and kept it together for so long. That's also how I see my son. My son's 5, and he has meltdowns sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, what is this meltdown about? Oh, you gave me the blue cup instead of the yellow cup. And I'm like, really, we're gonna be in here for an hour because of a cup? But it's not just about the cup, it's the ancestral wounds that were never moved around, and now we're like, it's safe, it's okay, let's release it. So yeah, a big hope is not only for us to kind of work on supporting, normalizing, and healing ourselves in this lifetime, but also healing and breaking the generational curses and intergenerational wounds that we've brought in with us.
So awesome to hear. I mean, even as professionals, we do get to take responsibility for creating our own care team for ourselves. And I love hearing that you have your therapy, your yoga, your meditation. But more importantly, I think what really stood out for me is really being not afraid to set those boundaries, because those boundaries, if you don't set those boundaries for yourself, you lose the opportunity to take care the way that you're supposed to take care. And creating those boundaries, like I'm sleeping at this time with my son, that's a great boundary to have, regardless of what's on the plate or what needs to be
Mhm.
done. and the meditation. What's interesting about the meditation, and then Sheena will close it out for us. Um, when I've worked with people and helped them to incorporate meditation, and there's so much resistance. I'm sure you've come across this too. It's like, I don't know if I can even stand 1 minute meditating because it gets the voices in my head. It's like, okay, well, just try it for 30 seconds and then just see what happens. And that, sure enough, when they do it for 30 seconds, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how much I needed that. And then you just build on it. And then now, like the people that I used to coach are saying before, like, I could never meditate. Now it's a part of their daily, and they can't function if they don't meditate for at least a good 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, this is great. People need to be aware of these things. So it's great that you have your care team, you're setting up these boundaries. It's so awesome to hear. It's so awesome.
Yeah, and I just would like to add that there's different forms of meditation. I think we have like uh a vision of it where it's just like sitting still for hours, and like no, like yoga is movement meditation, who says you can't listen to music, who says you can't listen to something to find ways to connect deeper. And the last thing I'll say as well is, thank you for just reflecting back the importance of boundaries. Like no is a full sentence, and expressing boundaries will actually show you who your real community is.
Yep.
Expressing boundaries is going to show you who it was around you that was benefiting from you not having any, and is actually going to show you who the folks are who actually care about you. Because when I started doing that and then cleaning out the folks who are getting upset, it's so amazing the community that you build when you're like, I had a rough week. I'm not coming to hang. And then people are like, oh, sorry, would have loved to see you. Can we drop you some food so you don't have to cook? You know what I mean? Like expressing boundaries will really, truly show you who your community of care is.
It's so true. It's so true. And yeah, in this work, like when you start doing the work, you start to see those friends, they start to fall off, right? And then the real ones, the ones that you've communicated, hey, I'm working on myself at this time. I can't hang because I want to work on myself. And when I work on myself, I'm going to come back 100% the version that you really want. And when they hear that, it's like, okay, go do what you got to do. Do you need any support? Do you need any help? Do you need any food to be dropped off? Those are the real ones. Those are the real ones.
And France, I think one of the key things that you said that really resonated is finding the right language to really explain this, right? So, for example, for me at least, before when I would hear, therapeutic practice or a meditative practice, to say practice makes it feel very optional. But when you say it's part of your emotional and mental hygiene, that makes it feel like it's necessary, which it is. And when you give the example of brushing your teeth every day, you know, once people make that connection, then they realize, oh, actually, it is something that I should probably do. You don't have to do these things, but when it's part of a hygienic, practice, it makes it easier to tap into. So thank you for that. I think a lot of folks will really resonate with that too. So, as we begin to close, can you please remind our community how to best reach you? If they have any additional questions regarding what we discussed here, Santa Kapwa or Therapin Canada.
Yes, so all easy to find on Instagram. We have a wonderful marketing team that manages the at Sans Capwa page and respond quite quickly. You can also go on our website, which is sanscapwa.org, so ORG, and join our mailing list. And you do not need to be from Canada, because sometimes we also do things online and have wonderful community a little bit everywhere. So, really grateful for that. And if you want to reach out to me personally because something I said resonated with you, I mean, I'm more than happy to talk, book a discovery call. I want to express deep gratitude to you, Marking. You've been saying numerous times how you see me as a light. But what's funny is I actually see myself as a bridge. how like I could like I'm not necessarily the right healer for everyone, but I'm happy because of this web of community that I've been building and creating and nurturing. I'm happy to be a bridge for what folks need. So on Instagram, France Stohner, so FranceStohner. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Um, and in closing, I also just, wanted to do a little shout out specifically to the Filipino Canadian community. Last April, we had a horrible tragedy which happened on Lapu Lapu Day, where a lot of our community members were deeply injured and some lost their lives. And, it was really interesting because all of a sudden everyone was talking about the importance of mental health. And I love it, but I also want to get to a point where we are no longer just addressing crises, but are being preventative. So it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for support. Please join communities that are advocating for culturally relevant services. And if you don't think that that's worth it, I just want to remind folks that Filipinos have been in Canada for quite some time. I've been saying the 60s a lot, but actually, a couple of years ago, there was a journalist who was just doing a Filipino Canadian journalist who was doing some random research and came across some archives and actually found out that the first documented Filipino was Benson Flores, who arrived in Vancouver in 1861 as a fisher person and used to rent fishing boats out of Bowen Island in BC. So I just want to tell Filipino Canadians out there who are hesitant of taking up space and asking for what they need. We have been here since 1861, and Canada was not declared a constitutional monarchy until 1867. So we've been in Canada before Canada was Canada. So this is just my kind of closing words to be like, take up space, ask for what you need.
And then also, just as so you know, and then also for the Filipino Canadians out there, when that whole incident went down at the Lapu Lapu Festival, LA Filipinos, I don't know, I can't speak for the Bay Area. I can only speak to LA Filipinos, but we were up in arms. We were providing support wherever we could. Filipino Canadian Strong was something that was definitely prevalent in social media. But just to let the Filipino Canadians know, at least as far as here in our little corner of the United States in LA, we see you guys, and we
Absolutely.
felt for the whole community out there.
Absolutely. And so, final words, is there anything else that you would want our global community to know when it comes to the Filipinx Canadian diasporic mental health and wellness community and movements?
There is no healthy kapwa work without healthy loob work, and there's no healthy loob work without healthy kapwa work.
Love that.
Love that. And very, very true. Time to embrace that shadow side.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Salamat. Merci beaucoup, France. We're really excited to witness your journey as you continue to help contribute to the mental health and wellness of the Filipinx Canadians in Montreal and throughout Canada as your work with Therapin Canada and Centre Kapwa. We look forward to staying connected in partnership and sharing your upcoming opportunities with our community.
And to our community, for our final episode of season 5, we will be bringing to the podcast for the first time womb and energy healing practitioner, women's circle facilitator Jeannie Smith, based out of Darwall County in Shell Harbour, New South Wales, Australia. Whoo dang. So stay tuned for that, as the episode will be titled Womb Care, Tending and Nurturance, will air on Wellness Wednesday, March 11th, 2026. And as we close, we would like to acknowledge once again our guest speaker, France Stohner. Thank you very much, France. our creative lead, Richie, and our video editor, Harmony Tanganan Kwan, our social media strategist and development coordinator, Kathleen Torrio, and our outreach manager, Maya Custodio. We also want to acknowledge our advisors, Allison De La Cruz, Rian De Los Reyes, and Sapo Teologo. Our community partners, SoCal Filipinos, hey Jason, the Filipino American Life, Rising Filipinos, Therapin, and all of our community members for your shares and support. As always, you can find more about our guest offerings on our IG stories and saved into our highlights. So you'll have permanent access to their upcoming events. Be sure to follow us at Filipinx and Wellness on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, all the socials. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Filipinx and Wellness YouTube channel. If you like what we're bringing you and would like more, show us some love by buying us a Ko-Fi or take advantage of our offerings via our monthly membership on Patreon. Thank you as always for believing us. Be well, everyone. Continue to take care of yourselves and each other. And we're out. Thank you, guys.
Maraming salamat.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Mercy buckets.
Hello, everyone. Magandang araw. This is Sheena Katz and Mark King, and we are the hosts of Filipinx and Wellness, a podcast rooted in community, culture, and collective healing for the Filipinx community.
And today we are super excited to announce something we've been dreaming of for a while. We are launching our official Patreon.
This is your invitation to ride along with us. If our episodes have ever made you feel seen, witnessed, or naintindihan, then this is your space to be part of what keeps it going.
Your support on Patreon directly funds our ability to keep creating, covering production costs, bringing on more brilliant guests, and expanding what this community can be.
We've also created some very special offerings for our members, things like exclusive bonus contents, Filipino health and wellness products, invitations to live wellness events, digital resources, and more.
Whether you're joining for $1 a month or $20, know that every contribution fuels a movement, one where Filipino wellness is visible, centered, and celebrated.
So if you've been vibing with us, learning with us, and would like to see more, come join us on Patreon. Let's strengthen this movement together.
Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat.